that, people look at the other side, but you're the guy pulling that stuff off. The guy's a genius.
It's interesting. I mean, we've heard a lot about these polls. Could there be fraud? There might be fraud. I mean, it just seems to be adding a lot of confusion into sort of the mix, especially at these tough times. But, you know, a lot of Americans have talked about the economy. They've talked about inflation. They've talked about these are the...
Uncensored, unexpurgated, and unapologetic. It's the Cary Harrison Show.
Right, we have a lot to get through today. Next up, we have radio host Cary Harrison. He's joining me now in the studio from the States, should I say. Thanks a lot, Cary, for joining us here at RT. Now, there's been a lot of talk about the Republicans could take the lead in these elections, especially amid criticism of Democratic policies on inflation and economy. What do you expect to see?
It's interesting, by the way, thank you. This has been a very busy day for all of us, and it will get busier in days to come. Interesting to note that in Arizona, where Caleb was talking about the voting machines not having enough printing ink and all of that, that's alleged. What we do know for sure is that the current sitting Secretary of State is running for her reelection, and it could be that the side that Donald Trump is claiming, having created a video today, that the problem is this, that, and the other. But it could be because we don't know for sure if these machines actually were malfunctioning. In other words, if you don't want the current Secretary of State, a Democrat, to be reelected, you claim the machines that she is in charge of are not working. Therefore, a Democrat has no control over honest and fair elections. That's a game. That's a kind of fraud in its own way. These are the same people who claim that in 2020, Joe Biden didn't fairly win the election. We now know, as of today, from the Heritage Foundation and other nonprofit organizations, that only 35 people out of 350 million committed any kind of fraudulent voting activity, which is a felony in the United States, punishable by $5,000, enough to bankrupt most people in this country. So really, is there fraud? No. Is there threat of it simply by using political monkey shines, by going on TV and radio and constantly saying over and over again? Yes, it does sow doubt. But let's go back to the United States pre-1884. Before then, we did voice votes. You went into a courthouse, a judge made you swear on a Bible, swear that you were who you said you were and hadn't voted before. And then you had to vote in public, in front of your neighbors, in front of God, in front of other people who might not like the way you vote. And so they made sure you didn't vote the wrong way because you have to live in that town for the rest of your life and you better vote the right way. All of this was the way it worked. Plus, they served booze, liquor, alcohol at election night. In fact, my ancestors, going back to about 1775, before this became the United States, we were still British, brewed 300,000 gallons of peach brandy for George Washington's election. Did it help? Yes.
All right, Cary.
People booze.
All right, Ken. Let's not go back that far back. I know there's a lot to talk about. Look, while I have you here, you know, Biden's been talking about, you know, the allegations that a Republican-controlled Congress would be a threat to democracy. What does he mean by that?
I think what he means, he's probably referring to gerrymandering, referring to what's going on in Georgia, one of the most important states, because it would change the face of the Senate. Brian Kemp, who has created ways to declare that tens of thousands of people are voting illegally. They're not voting illegally, but what Brian Kemp has been doing, this is clever stuff, like Machiavellian genius. You send out little cards to people in the mail and ask them to verify that they live at that address. But the cards don't look like anything official, so people throw them out. If that government, run by Brian Kemp, who's running for re-election as government, don't receive that card back, they get cut off the voter rolls. They tend to be people of color, Hispanics, Asians, people who might not vote Republican, people who don't look like Brian Kemp. And so these are the tricks. So when you accuse the other side of doing that, people look at the other side, but you're the guy pulling that stuff off. The guy's a genius.
It's interesting. I mean, we've heard a lot about these polls. Could there be fraud? There might be fraud. I mean, it just seems to be adding a lot of confusion into sort of the mix, especially these tough times. But, you know, a lot of Americans have talked about the economy. They've talked about inflation. They've talked about these are the major concerns. Of course, abortion's up there as well. But what's Biden not done? What could the Republicans do if they did take some power back?
Well, what could they do? They could probably, if you're a woman, for instance, make your life a lot more difficult. If you feel as a woman, which is 61% of the global human population, that you have a right to control your own body. If you're one of those people, greater than half the human population, you may not want the government taking that right permanently away from you. It looks like if the Democrats were to win, this is on the side of women again, they would codify that a woman actually has agency over her own human physical body. So that would be a plus for women. But if you're male and think that women should not have that right, then you want the Republicans to win. You want the Republicans to make corporations stronger and have more power than ever over everything that's in front of you. If you own a corporation, that's what you want. So it depends what team you're playing for. Are you a little guy? Are you a big guy? And that's really what this is about in America, because we are the land of business at the end of the day. It's about power, property, and prestige. So if you don't have much, you don't want the guys who do have it. If it's the other way around, well, you want to win. It's always been that way in history.
Right. Cary, let me ask you a final question when I have you here. These midterms, will they sway the next elections, you know, in a couple of years' time, depending on, you know, the Republicans or the Democrats taking it?
For sure. So whoever is in power has the loudest megaphone. That means you're going to get to be on TV. You're going to get to be in the newspaper. You're going to get to have town halls and rallies. You're going to maybe get Donald Trump to come in because you're already in power. Whoever is in charge is more in charge than ever. Yes, it will sway how the presidential election looks. If you are a senator, United States senator, and you start declaring that there is fraud and monkey shines and deceit going on left and right, and the only one who can save the day is the new Uncle Sam, headed up by fill in the blank, gun-toting, abortion-hating, Jesus-loving guy, well, it's kind of a slam dunk. So, of course, the more power you have, the more people that think like you, the more messaging you get out.
Excellent. Cary Harrison, always a pleasure talking to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us here at RT. Speak again soon. Take care. Stay safe.
What would you do if you had a broken bone? You'd go to the doctor and use your insurance, right? What would you do if you had a serious problem with drugs and alcohol? Most people do nothing until it's too late. Your insurance can help you get clean and sober with the assistance of a place like the Detox and Treatment Helpline. Many times treatment is fully covered, so why not use your insurance to treat your addiction problem just like you would if you had a broken bone? And with the Family Medical Leave Act, you're allowed by law to take off time from work, and your employer doesn't need to know the reason. So there are two good reasons. You've got insurance you can use for your addiction problem, and with the Family Medical Leave Act, it's completely confidential. Call us right now and save a life.
Call 855-325-5512. That's 855-325-5512. Call 855-325-5512 now.
From Public Radio, it's the Cary Harrison Show.
I've spent a decade taking a bite out of conspiracy theories, unraveling urban legends, and grappling with worldwide top secret issues.
I've even racked up some of their awards.
Wow, I mean, first of all, what a question.
Journalism is about telling the truth, all while ferreting out the bottom line.
I'm a Harrison Hellraiser.
With me, Cary Harrison, as your guide.
Are you moving cross-country? You've heard the horror stories about some moving companies. Rude employees show up who aren't careful with your valuables and may even lose them. Then, after their poor, unprofessional service is complete, you get to pick up the pieces while moving into your new home. At 1-800-PACK-RAT, we've got a much better method. You start by calling us for your free no-obligation quote. When you're ready, we'll drop a container off at your location. You pack your valued possessions at your leisure. They stay safe at your home. When you're ready, just call us. We'll pick it up and give you a schedule date of when your furniture and possessions will be at your new home. Our all-steel portable storage and moving containers ensure your items are safe and secure, because our top priority is providing the best customer service in the industry.
Call 855-348-4699 now for your free quote. That's 855-348-4699.
Public Radio. It's the Cary Harrison Show.
I've spent a decade taking a bite out of conspiracy theories, unraveling urban legends, and grappling with worldwide top secret issues.
I've even racked up some of their awards.
Wow, I mean, first of all, what a question.
Journalism is about telling the truth.
All while ferreting out the bottom line.
I'm a Harrison Hellraiser.
Uh-oh, with me, Cary Harrison, as your guide.
And it is the top of the hour. Cary Harrison with you, your new best friend. Welcome. It is election day. It may not be election day if you're hearing this later as a podcast, but it is, we say this every number of years now, don't we? The single most election in all of human history. The world will stop. Everyone will die if they don't vote today. So we've heard that one over and over again, but it feels like this one might actually be kind of real. Of course, the stakes are, what color is in Congress? Is it blue? Is it red? We don't have any other colors. None. So, you have to join your ball team, whether you like them or not, and you got to run, and tackle each other. Well, we're going to get into that with a guy who is perspicacious and bright with many, many years in journalism. Help us untangle what's going on, not only in our voting and why it seems so confusing today, but where it came from and what it used to be like. Like you probably didn't know, it was a booze up. It was like crazy time with lots of alcohol, and they paid guys to go vote, and they voted that way in chunks of ballots, already filled out, ready to go, took the cash and run. Now, we're going to learn about that, but I'm going to admit something to you. I have not broken the law, but, I am going to admit this. My great, whatever ancestor, going back before the revolution and then after the revolution, brewed 300,000 gallons of peach brandy for George Washington's election. And that peach brandy ended up going up to all of the different military establishments to get them all to vote the right way. And guess what? They did. Because I'll tell you, back then, if somebody hands you a lot of peach brandy and winter is coming, where do you need me to vote and for whom? Unlike today, where we CNN, BBC and Fox News and Newsmax and News Nation and general perversion in all ways, all streams 24 hours of sell it, baby, sell the politics. Don't really let people figure it out. There wasn't really such that. We had basically one national newspaper in Philadelphia, sort of at the time in the late 1700s. And if you were naughty and wrote the wrong kind of story, you were taken out on the street and tied to a pole and bullwhipped. And you, as a writer, as a journalist, learned, much as when we left England, the idea was if you upset the king, your head fell off and would roll down the gutter. Well, this was kind of the same thing, because who was voting back in the early days? My ancestors, white men landowners. And the law was, by the way, you had to be a white male landowner, period. And so with that, you were the one that got to vote. And what did you vote in? Not only your best interest, but your only interest, the only interest that interested you. All of that has changed. We're going to get into that and why that is so critically important today in a country of truly e pluribus unum, and that's what we're all certainly fighting for here on KPFK. Cary Harrison with you. Want you to get my free newsletter where you're going to get this kind of history, this kind of access, and stuff similar to a podcast that we wouldn't dare say on FCC-regulated airwaves. Sound effects you might not be able to hear on the radio. All kinds of good, clean fun like that. Simply go to caryharrison.com, CaryHarrison.com, and sign up for my free newsletter, and you'll get all kinds of cool bells and whistles. We sent a bunch out so far. If you're a newer subscriber, you might not have gotten one yet, but one is on the way for sure. We're going to talk about voting, what it means. Then we're going to open up the phones a little later on. I want to hear from you. Have you actually encountered any voting maladies? So let's say you're in Arizona right now in Maricopa County. We all remember my wonderful interview with Sheriff Joe from Maricopa County. What a piece of work that guy is. Well, that's the county that also contains for sure, Phoenix, Arizona. It's, what is it, almost half the whole state votes in there. And their voting machines suddenly aren't working properly. According to the U.S. military, I like to read the military news too, because believe it or not, depending on your politics, the military is a fairly stable organization. They don't fly off the handle because they have some safeguards. Are not so bad. I kind of like military with safeguards. And they report, quote, a video out of Maricopa today. This is the American Military News. Video out of Maricopa County, Arizona on Tuesday showed a man who appeared to be a county election worker advising dozens of voters waiting in line that their vote tabulation machines are not working. We have two tabulators. The apparent poll worker told the video. It may have been a poll worker. One of the tabulators is not working, okay? The other tabulator is taking about 75% successful. So 25% of them are being misread, and it could be a printer issue, or it could be the tabulator itself. So see ya. Tough. The apparent poll worker then said voters waiting in line have the option to either pull their ballots into what's called box number 3. Ooh, exciting, box number 3. And it gets read whether it goes downtown, it gets read manually, or whether it gets refed into our tabulator. Nobody really knows, but it's box number 3. Really, it will get read, we assure you. It goes on and on. So there are certain places where voting today is so hypercritical. It is win or lose for whatever color you wear on your political jersey. And these kind of monkey shines are not particularly uncommon. That's why it's good to go back in time and find out where pretty much it all started. Cary Harrison with you. You can follow me across all social media at Cary Harrison or Go Harrison. Just Google it. They'll all come up. And I'm passionate, obviously, about our elections. I think most of us are. Most of us feel a certain stewardship toward honesty, integrity, toward it going the right way. In 1884, as many of us know, and our guest will be able to talk about that more in depth, but in the state of Indiana, next to the state where I was born, Illinois, land of Lincoln, related on my mother's side, you hang around here long enough for your part of a certain group of gametes, you're going to be connected to pretty much everyone. So it's not particularly spectacular, but it does make you feel a little bit more concerned about how things are unfolding and maybe a little more, offer a little more scrutiny than the next guy. And in Indiana in 1888, Grover Cleveland and some others were running along with the state electors that elect the president and probably, city council, et cetera. And the GOP at the time, which was the party of Abraham Lincoln, but it was still the GOP, showed up with what were called rascals and had ballots ready to go. Like, here's some money, go vote 1,000 million times, and because they weren't secret ballots. I mean, you used to, let me not spoil this. Let me bring in the grown-ups here. How's that? I'm just, a blaze, a fizz, a Twitter, not Twitter today. Not until Elon Musk sends me a personal $8 check, then I will reconsider that. I want to introduce to you Al Tompkins. He's one of America's most requested broadcast journalists and multimedia teachers and coaches. After nearly 30 years of working as a reporter, photojournalist, a producer, investigative reporter, head of special investigations, and a news director, Al Tompkins joined the Poynter Institute. And you'll need to know about the Poynter Institute if you don't. They're among the few bastions of intelligence, of balance, of fact-checking, of other things that we all wish we had at our fingertips. They have that there, and it's remarkably in a very important voting state, that's Florida. The Poynter Institute, Poynter. And he's now there as a senior faculty for broadcast and online. He's author of Aim for the Heart, a textbook about multimedia storytelling that has been adopted by more than 100 universities worldwide. He's taught in 49 states, in Canada, and Egypt, Denmark, South Africa, Iceland, and the Caymans. Al Tompkins is the recipient of some of journalism's highest awards, including the National Emmy, the Japan Prize, There's the American Bar Association's Silver Gavel, the Peabody Group, or Peabody, if you're from Massachusetts, the Peabody Group Award, 7 National Headliner Awards, the Robert F. Kennedy Award, and the Iris Award. He was inducted into the Kennedy Journalism Hall of Fame, honored with the Governor's Award from the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, and he helped to author the National Codes for Ethics for both the National Press Photographers Association and the Radio and Television Digital News Association. Well, I'd say that CV is sufficient enough to bring him on and for you to have some pretty immediate trust and confidence that you're going to hear something smart and good. Al Tompkins, I want to welcome you so much to the Cary Harrison.
That was just tiring is what that was. All right, so let me give you some news just to see if I can help. By the way, this whole television radio thing is just
my invention.
It's mind-bending, right?
Isn't it cool?
All right, so let me give you a little news out of Maricopa County. Whatever problems they were having there apparently now are solved and have been solved since about noontime. What happened there is that there were problems with some ballots. And despite all the conspiracy theories, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second, what was happening is people were filling out their ballot, putting it in the tabulator, and in some cases, the tabulator wasn't reading them. I'll tell you about that in a second. But it's not like, oh, they're not going to count my votes. That's not what happens at all. What happens is you take the ballot and you put it into a secure box, and then it goes to the central processing office to get counted. So this is really so much about nothing. What happened is the technology is such that the video that you were talking about was a video of a poll worker who was out telling people, look, don't be surprised. This is what's going on. And it's possible that you will take your ballot and put it into the secure box and it will be, hand counted. What happened is the technicians ended up going in about noon today, Phoenix time, and they changed the printer settings. It turns out that the printers we're not producing dark enough images for the ballots to get correctly read. So they just adjusted the printer. Printer started printing correctly, and now that is issue. So why did this become such a big issue? I mean, this is just one of those things, right? Who's running for governor? The Secretary of State. And so if you could raise questions about the Secretary of State who's running for governor, then that would go against her, right? So let's don't get too crazy about this. These things happen when you have millions of votes coming in, and when you have technology involved. It does happen that sometimes readers don't read, sometimes printers don't print, sometimes people don't fill things out correctly, and it takes a while to get it corrected. But
I'm just going to jump in, Al, because every now and then the radio portion of this, people drive, get in and out of their cars. They can't tell who's talking to whom. So I'm just going to reintroduce you. We're talking to Al Tompkins, one of America's most requested broadcast journalism, multimedia teachers and coaches with the Poynter Institute. And we're talking about Election Day and some of the mishaps that have gone on through history. And Al, to your point, the Heritage Foundation and others have done studies and research to find out just how much, fraud is going on. And it turns out that the lion's share of any of it in recent times has been, oopses, boo-boos, and klutzes by the people working the elections, not like really dark, evil corruption.
Well, the Brennan Center, which is a very reputable research, I want you to get your head around this number because it went back and looked at past election races. The error rate for voting is 0.0003%, or 3/10,000th of a percent. You have far greater chance of crashing your car and dying or getting hit by lightning than you do miscounting your vote today. Despite all of the noise that gets said around this, the fact is we have pretty reliable voting, and it's so much more reliable than it was, for example, at the beginning of our democracy. This is one of those things, people are always sort of hearkening back to, back in the good old days, when my father and grandfather, they were much more together. And the truth is,
yeah, and if they weren't black,
the truth is they weren't.
Yeah.
So for about the first 50 years or so of our country, we didn't have secret ballots at all. The original framers, it's so often people talk about the framers, the fathers of the Constitution, the framers of the Constitution were so wise. And in many ways they were. But originally, our voting system wasn't based on the whole idea that it was going to be a secret ballot. Not at all. For the first 50 years or so of our democracy, it was one crazy raucous party. And what would happen is you would go into the voting place, which often was a courthouse or a gathering spot, and you would put your hand on a Bible, swear that you were who you say you were, and that you hadn't voted somewhere else. And then you would stand there with your pals, and you would vote. You would have to, put your hand up. It was called a voice vote. Back then it was called a viva vote, a voice vote, and it was really corrupt, very corrupt, but also highly pressured, as you can imagine. It was also quite liquored up. And that was really the norm at that time. In fact, even George Washington participated in introducing spirits into the election. There was one report of Washington when he was trying to get votes for the Virginia House in the race of 1758, that it was Washington himself who supplied 47 gallons of beer, 35 gallons of wine, 2 gallons of cider, and 3.5 pints of brandy, and 70 gallons of rum punch. He, by the way, carried that election by 310 votes. And it was true.
And to your point, Al, I mentioned earlier that my ancestor had brewed up 300,000 gallons of peach brandy for George.
Well, there you go. So that was not uncommon, and it wasn't seen as unseemly. It was seen as being polite. If you've called us here, then there must be a good reason for it. And in honor of Cary Harrison, we have to remember that it was one of the most corrupt of all elections. The election of 1884. And the election of 1884 was so corrupt, in fact, that it led to vote reforms. In fact, the very invention of the mechanical voting machine, called the Myers automatic booth from Niagara, New York, actually was born out of necessity after the gross mismanagement of the election of 1884, which carries your family's namesake, of course. So thank you for the rich heritage that you've given us, and for
I'm just giving you a whiff of creepy greatness here. Let me reintroduce.
Well, there it is.
If you're just joining us right now, driving in and out as we do during rush hour, we're talking right now to Al Tompkins, one of America's most requested broadcast journalism, multimedia teachers, coaches. 30 years working as a reporter, photojournalist, producer, investigative reporter, senior guy at the Poynter Institute, which is one of the rock solid foundations we still get to have in America today, a guy that can parse out the when, the who, the what of the media being the very thing that you're listening to right now, the very thing that I participate in and help you try to understand and wrap your head around. His further expertise, among many things, is looking at the history of voting here in the U.S. And what you didn't know is you'll hear us talk about, well, we went over there to see how legal and reasonable the voting was in South America somewhere. Well, we have a reciprocal agreement, not with everybody, but we actually have an agreement that allows foreign countries to come here and observe our voting.
That was interesting, because I heard a big critique that, why are we having people from other countries coming and observe us? We can't even run our own election. And the truth is, we've been doing this since 1990, Democrat and Republican in office, and it's really quite normal. And for example, we've had observers remember the big Democratic vote that ended apartheid in South Africa. There were American observers there, and so on, in other important elections. So it's not unusual. It's actually pretty robust. The idea is that we'll actually learn something from each other and then share that learning. And when things are going as well as they should in the United States, we can be a pretty darn good instructor for other emerging democracies.
So here we have Al Tompkins in recent times. A couple of years ago, the election of 2020, we have candidates, and I love the irony. I just love the irony of life. But candidates out there saying, vote for me, and I will make the elections fair. Well, by voting for you, we would have to assume the elections were fair. Otherwise, you wouldn't be having me vote for you. But we're not supposed to think that deeply, I don't suppose. We have this wave of election denial all over the United States, which we now know through the research that you brought forth and your newsletter today, which was beautiful, short, right to the point. We get it, we got it, and we're enlightened by it. In that, you point out that really there has not been a tsunami of election fraud going on, even though people at the highest places are claiming it is true. And the public, what do we know? If the grown-ups in the room say it's true, it must be true.
Well, but it's not. And look, there's this notion that somehow there must be two sides to every story. Right. And the truth is, there's not two sides to every story. There's just not. There's true and there's untrue sometimes. And there can be opinions sometimes, but it's not an opinion as to whether or not elections were correctly counted. They count, they recount, they recount, they recount. The 2020 recount was the most recounted, the most counted, the most verified election in American election history. And it did not turn up, in fact, election fraud. And I'm not even sure why we keep talking about it, because it's not in question. It's like saying, is there any question that today is Tuesday? No. Whether you choose to believe that or not doesn't matter. The fact is, it's Tuesday, and there's not another way to look at it. It's just flat out not another way. It's Tuesday. So, quit debating it, because there's not another side to it. By the way, go ahead.
I mean, that's just a great example of politics at work. If you want people to think that somehow you've been stolen from, and that could become the new narrative, then now you get sympathy from people that are your fans.
But just the fact that we're talking about it feeds it, right? Yeah, the fact of the matter is, so far this year, and I used in my column today, I used numbers from Heritage because it is a very conservative activist group. By their own count, and I counted them, by their own count, there have been a grand total this year of 39 voting fraud cases in the United States among all the primaries. 39. Look, we should have 0, but we don't. And of those 39, some of them were felons who did not have the right to vote. Some of them were people who had illegally collected ballots from neighbors or friends or other people. So they weren't necessarily people who they were creating ballots. In some cases, they were doing things procedurally wrong. In some cases, they were people who hadn't, who were convicted felons who hadn't had their rights restored. But 39 is the number. It's not 3,900 or 39,000. It's 39. And if 39 votes nationwide is enough to upset you and require all this conversation, then fine, but it's 39.
It's interesting, Al Tompkins, because as we look at what the accusations are, going back to 2020, going back to, dog catcher 4 months ago, or anyone now that's using this thing, we do know historically that there used to be these guys called rascals, and you pointed out they had a bunch of different names, different groups, splinter groups, where basically they were handed cash and they went in and they made mass voting.
No doubt.
Not today, but back then. So it was real once upon a time.
In my lifetime, and I can say this, I did cover the election of 1884. That's how old I am. But
you can see the video, by the way. I can. CaryHarrison.com.
I'm not kidding. And when I say this, I'm not kidding. I grew up in Kentucky. And in my lifetime, I personally witnessed a state senator when I was quite young, but I personally know a state senator who used to buy what they called election whiskey. They were half pint bottles of bourbon whiskey, being Kentucky, and they would hand them out at the polling center for people who supported them. And that was called election whiskey. And that was not that unusual in rural America. So they paid for votes. And in that case, they were people who actually went into the voting booth and actually said that they voted for them, and they would get their election whiskey. But sure, those things happen. But the truth of the matter is, it's just not widespread in the United States that we know of. Here's the other thing: is we have this notion that somehow we in 2020 are some kind of vote slackers, right? Like our parents and our grandparents, our great grandparents were so much more dedicated to going voting, and they would always go and vote. They never missed a vote, and it's not true. It's just not true. So I pulled the data from electproject.org if you want to look at it. But the fact of the matter is that our 2020 vote turnout was actually a little bit higher than the normal average of election turnout going back 100 years. So if you go back all the way to right around World War I, and even prior to World War I, it was lower. We're actually voting at a higher level, both in midterms and in general elections, than our parents and our grandparents, and in some cases our great-grandparents. And that shocks a lot of people. The other thing that I thought was interesting is I was pulling numbers. I wanted to know how the United States compares in voter turnout to other countries. And it turns out we're about in the middle of the pack of the countries that you normally would look at. So we're barely behind Greece and Austria and Portugal. Mexico's in front of us. France is in front of us. Brazil is in front of us. Some of these countries require voting, as you know. But other countries that I kind of thought would be ahead of us, Great Britain, for example, the UK is behind us. Spain, Italy, Ireland, Japan, and Canada both vote at a lower rate than we do. And I was surprised by that. I was pretty sure Canadians would be ahead of us, but they're not. So it turns out we're not the slackers that our parents think we are. And it turns out that we vote at a higher rate than a lot of other countries that we think have it together.
Yes, and we're told every cycle, whether it's a mini cycle like the midterms or a maxi cycle like a maxi pad called the president, that we're all going to die if we don't vote this time and vote the right way. This is it, end of the world, and that tends to stimulate some people. We're talking to Al Tompkins. He's one of America's most requested broadcast journalism and multimedia teachers and coaches. 30 years working as a reporter, photojournalist, producer, investigative reporter, head of special investigations, and news director. Al Tompkins joined the Poynter Institute, Poynter. You might Google that. You'll be amazed and wowed and find you could fact check and learn more. Learn more, imagine. Something we all ask about. Where do I learn more? Where do I get real news? He is now a senior faculty there for broadcast and online, author of Aim for the Heart, a textbook about multimedia storytelling that has been adopted by more than 100 universities worldwide, taught in 49 states. He's in Canada, Egypt, Denmark, South Africa, Iceland, even the Cayman Islands.
I haven't
He
taught
may or
in
may
New
not have a
Hampshire.
bank account.
I haven't taught in New Hampshire. That's the state that's missing. It's just bizarre. I've actually offered to do free training there just to get that ticked off, and I still haven't made that happen.
We're talking about voting today, and as we wrap up this conversation, Al Tompkins, and I'm very grateful for it because this is going to be first-time school for most of us. We didn't know that this and that went on. We didn't know that elections used to be giant booze-ups. Certainly in Chicago, the famous Mayor Daley and before, where we got the term the Windy City. And I'll let you handle how it became the Windy City.
In the early colonial days, the winner was expected to pay the bar tab for everybody, and it was really quite expected that whoever was the winner of the local election would pay the tab.
And the Windy City was called that not because it was windy, and it is legitimately windy, but because of people getting up and doing stump speeches and standing on beer barrels and yelling and screaming their political shenanigans. And that was the wind that it became the Windy City.
Look, I think this is a good day for us to have a conversation, and we ought to get serious about this. I was having a lunch conversation with a couple of buddies today, and I said, my concern for your listeners, the West Coast listeners, is that a lot of races get settled while they're still voting. And I think that's harmful. I don't know why do we have an election day? Why don't we have like an election weekend or something where we have like a 24-hour clock or a 48-hour clock and let everybody in the United States all vote, have a whole day where you could go vote if you wanted to, or you could vote by mail or whatever, and then close all the polls at exactly the same time, so that we don't have this washout, especially true for presidential elections. But let's say, for example, you were standing in line today and you started getting East Coast returns and it started going one way or another. You go, oh, forget it. I see what this is going to be. It doesn't matter it's a disincentive. So I think that Cary Harrison ought to pick up the campaign to say we need a 24-hour voting cycle where the whole country votes in unison, and then we shut it all down at the same time, and then we vote, then we count. I think that could be your campaign, and I look for you to change America's voting laws to do this. We look to you, my friend, to change things for the better. Fix this.
Well, listen, Al Tompkins, I accept that challenge, but I will tell you, it's not like that on purpose. It's not like it never occurred to us. It never occurred to us we could make trains run on time, or, not collide, or a control tower in an airport. What an odd idea. You mean radar? We can watch the planes and figure out. We choose not to do this for a lot of really good reasons.
This. And by the way, why don't you move the election to, let's do tax day and election day all on the same day. Okay, just one, the one day when we should focus on who we're answering to for our politicians.
Well, I like that.
Let's make April 15th should be our national election day.
Unless you want to get an extension, then you can vote in October.
Oh,
because that would be the law. And then maybe if you're making quarterly payments.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Then you vote 4 times. I see where you're going with this.
The Swiss have a very interesting dynamic in their voting. They are as close to pure democracy as you're going to see in modern world.
Well, but Switzerland doesn't have a very high voter turnout because they have so many people living there who aren't citizens. But go ahead with your idea.
And so the reason that they do that is because they like the idea of a plebiscite, because that way none of the politicians are on the hook for making any choices or decisions that they weren't motivated to go do. So it's kind of an interesting way out for
I'm not trading with them. I like our system better. Look, our system, here's the other thing that I want to say out loud on election night. We ought to be thanking people who run for election. And I know it's not popular right now to be an election holder, but I've known a lot of people. As a journalist, I've covered a lot of honest, decent, hardworking public service people who put their life on hold and go and be a mayor or be a secretary of state or be a school board member or all the other things on there. The things you don't want to do, but we insist that somebody do, and then we criticize them when they do it. We ought to thank every one of these people for running for office and putting themselves out there and doing this, because it's not easy. And people don't generally get rich being mayors and superintendents of small towns and all that kind of stuff. It's a life decision, and we ought to thank them, in my opinion, for being willing to be a public servant, because most of us wouldn't do it. We wouldn't do it. We wouldn't put ourselves out there. We wouldn't put ourselves up for scrutiny. And I think today, election day, is one of those days when we ought to be looking at that and say, you know what, I appreciate these people being willing to do this, and recognize most of them are pretty darn decent people. I've known a lot of very good, particularly state lawmakers, who work hard, they write budgets, and they try to do the right thing.
Certainly in California, we have many, such a large state, and we've gotten to know who many are, and they do put their neck on the block. One of the ways that I like to look at it, Al Tompkins, is the government is your cleaning lady, your garbage man. They fix the potholes, put the light bulbs in the lamps, do the stuff exactly as you point out nobody else wants to do. And they're there to do that icky business, which can also mean doing stuff at 3 a.m, making sure that everything is running. And it's often thankless work. Regrettably, the ones that cheat and are naughty are the ones that we know about. And therefore, a bad syllogism, a wrong syllogism, a non-proof proof, we assume that every single one of them is corrupt from top or bottom. But you'll talk to people who first get into politics, and they're there because they're passionate.
Yes.
They want to change things. They want to make it better.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And I've had a number of people in my family tree who have been in public service, and they, to a person, are people that I have idolized in my life. And anyway, I just think there ought to be a day when we say thank you. We have Veterans Day coming up on Friday, and thank you to the veterans for giving us and protecting this right to vote. And thank you to the honest, hardworking public servants who put themselves out there, not for the spotlight, but to do, as you say, the ugly work of patching up our roads and keeping our budgets and getting us through a pandemic and all of that. Absolutely.
And here we are today because of it. I want to thank you so much, Al Tompkins, for joining us today on the Cary Harrison Show and on these public radio stations, also on this podcast, heard on Spotify, Apple, the whole soup, cat, and pizzas, anywhere it streams. This is where it is. And you'll have a nice shelf life for many months to come. And as we continue toward the presidential election, I think what you say is going to resonate with people. And I hope I can have you on again before then, during then, to help us understand that which we cannot see with our own eyes, unfortunately.
I believe that people make good choices when they're provided with good information. And that's why we have Cary Harrison. Do your work, baby.
Thank you so much. We've been talking to Al Tompkins, one of America's most requested broadcast journalism and multimedia teachers and coaches. After 30 years working as a reporter, photojournalist, producer, investigative reporter, head of special investigations, and news director, Al Tompkins joined the Poynter Institute, where he's a senior faculty for broadcast and online, author of Aim for the Heart. You could Google that one. A textbook about multimedia storytelling. That would be what we're doing right now. Live streaming video on all the platforms simultaneously, as well as shooting through a terrestrial antenna. Wow. Old school, news school, bursting through people's windshields on the 405. What could be more fun than that? His book, textbooks, his vision, what he has written about has been adopted by more than 100 universities worldwide. And he has taught in 49 states except New Hampshire. And then outside in Canada, Egypt, Denmark, South Africa, Iceland, and the Caymans. Thank you again for joining us on this election day in this election endless season, Al Tompkins. I appreciate it very much.
You're welcome.
All right, Cary Harrison with you. Coming up, we're going to be taking your live calls. I know it's been a while because we've been in a pledge drive, but it's your turn to speak up what you think about how fair it is. Have you ever encountered anything? We're not asking to create make-believe here. I just want your sense of, do you feel that you have trust in the system? Do you like the system? How would you like to improve it? 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735, 818-985-KPFK. Pick up the phone. Do not make a donation unless you feel like it. But you'll hit the option that says live airline. I think one of them says make a pledge. You could do that after the fact, but this one is to get on the air, so make sure you hit that right button. 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Cary Harrison with you. More to come.
Uncensored, unexpurgated, and unapologetic. It's the Cary Harrison Show.
There we go. Well, what do you know? I muted my own microphone, and here I am supposed to be a guy with 30 years in radio. But there are now so many buttons. Once upon a time when I started, there was one, a mic switch. Red, it lit up. In meant red on, which meant mic hot. Out meant mute. Now I've got 48 buttons, live streaming video, live chats, tweets, Facebook. You don't care. You don't feel any sympathy whatsoever for me, but I'm just letting you know how hard this is. What I was saying is, it is 40 minutes past the hour. Cary Harrison here with you, your new best friend. Don't forget to get my free newsletter, Our Favorite Price, which will include all the kind of stuff that you're not going to get anywhere else that sometimes we don't dare do on this FCC regulated radio station. You can simply go to caryharrison.com, CaryHarrison.com, sign up for the free newsletter, and you're going to get a lot of cool new stuff. Taking your live calls right now, asking you the simple question, do you trust our election system? Now, you've just heard from Al Tompkins of the Poynter Institute, which is one of the last remaining girthy institutions of competence and gatekeeping. And he pointed out that, 0.00003, I mean, it's like ridiculous. It's 35 people out of 340 million committing some kind of fraud. And it is felonious, $5,000 fine. But it simply does not happen. And the issues that do are generally technical clodhopper things of well-meaning poll workers dropping something, losing a piece of paper. But there is no great malfeasance except stuff that we know is stinky or people at large declaring entire elections fraudulent. So I'm asking you, do you like our system? What would you do to improve it? And have you ever seen anything that's gone afoul? 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Let's go to GS in South Lake Tahoe. GS, you're on the Cary Harrison Show. Welcome. Hello, GS.
You hear me?
I hear you now, my friend.
Okay, very good. I better cup my hand over my mic. Am I coming through clearly?
I'm sorry. Say that again.
Okay, am I coming through clearly? Can you get my word?
Yes. Hello, London. Yes, you're coming through clearly.
Hello, London. Okay. All right, I'll start over. I am one of your friendly neighborhood sustaining members. Used to volunteer in the phone room down there. It was at the front desk part-time on Fridays. It doesn't matter about me. I do believe, as I think you guys have been describing, that our election mechanism is sound. I think it's something we can trust. And, I feel honored at the opportunity to express my opinion when I vote, and I vote every time. So the thing that I'd like to just float is the influence of lies in people's opinions before they vote. In particular, I am extremely concerned about the influence of a person whose initials are DJT. I will not speak the man's name, but it's like the Pied Piper walking everybody over a cliff. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for calling at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. And I know every time you hear those numbers, it's a pledge drive. But also, I want you to feel this is reciprocal. It's not just me blasting through your windshield on the whatever freeway you're on, the 60 now, which is the great way to get back from Palm Springs efficiently and like in 2 hours or less. Who knew that was possible? But your voice is necessary, especially here on voting day. 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Do you trust and appreciate our form of election? This does not mean that you're in love with gerrymandering. It does not mean that the hideous election fraud, which is a different level in Georgia done by the governor, Brian Kemp, we'll find out what that looks like anyway in a day or two. It doesn't mean that you endorse or support that, but minus all of that stuff, do you think our system is good and fair and reasonable? What have you seen and observed? What do you think we could do better, including talking about gerrymandering and such? Is this a real issue? Has it impeded your right to have a free and open voice? 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. We know with certainty right now that some states are not going to complete their votes. Today is voting day. If you're hearing this as a podcast later on, it was voting day, but the same rules apply. So don't think, this doesn't count because this happened a day ago. No, This is how it's going to happen again, 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 whoever you are, wherever you live. So think of this as continuing education, as mini school. Votes will not be counted today by many. And you know, it comes with that suspicion that somebody might tamper with the results. But history shows us that even when it takes all of these days or even more than a week to complete all the different counts, the number of proven cases of fraud is few, minuscule. We talked about that with Al Tompkins, like 0.0003, 35 out of 340, 350 million, whatever our population is, and we'll find out with the next census. We also have now 35 million Latino voters, which in 5 years ago, we didn't have numbers like that. So that is a huge swaying of the election numbers. And there will be forces who don't want those voices heard. But our system is pretty intact and pretty fair and square. And I think most of us are doing our level best, except for the guys at the very top who want to have supreme power and are trying to convince us that this thing is busted. Let's go to Bart in Malibu. You're on the Cary Harrison Show. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, so I saw a documentary about 8 years ago about this grandchild asked the grandmother about democracy, how's it work, and blah, 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 can they cheat? And the grandmother looked into it. That was the whole thing behind the documentary. And
whoops, I hope you're still there, my friend. I'm not hearing you. Okay, maybe you're back on hold. We'll keep you there for a second because you were just getting to the finish line, or even the second post there. So we'll see if you come back. We'll go to line 2. Say hello to Julian at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. You're on the Cary Harrison Show. Welcome.
you're back on. Hello?
Hello, Julian.
Hi, can you hear me?
It's been years since I've said, turn down your radio, please.
Just turned it down a sec.
There you go. Hey, Julian.
Thank you. Hi. I just want to speak on the question of believing in our country's system of voting, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I don't. Every year becomes even harder and harder to believe in it. Change is very hard to come by through our electoral system. I think we need a decentralized voting system. I believe in democracy fully, but I think the United States as a whole, I guess I should have had my idea together a bit.
Well, it's not like we do call-ins a lot, so it's okay. You got a free pass, my friend. But just summarize it for me in 23 seconds.
I think we need, I would like, I guess, first for context that I am an anarchist and I believe in a decentralized version of voting that I think us as American people are more than competent enough to achieve if we look beyond the hierarchies and bureaucracies set for us today.
All right. I do appreciate your call, my friend. Very well put, by the way. You get an A+ on the delivery of that. Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Show. You can go to caryharrison.com, get my free newsletter. And also I'm doing a live TV hit at 8 p.m. Eastern, which would be 5 p.m. Pacific today. And you'll be able to see the live stream of that on caryharrison.com, doing some overseas coverage. They want to know about our elections here. So I'll be talking about that. You'll be able to see that. It'll probably be a 5-minute live piece. So I'm hoping you'll be able to join me. It'll be on there afterward if you don't catch it live. We're taking your live calls for the last 10 minutes here at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735, talking about election integrity, talking about our system. What would you see to improve it? Do you feel satisfied, having learned the actual statistics just in the last half hour of how truly safe it is, other than people at the top that are politicians that would frustrate it? But as far as you and I operate it, well, it's pretty complete and rock tight. Let's say hi to Harold in Santa Barbara. You're on the Cary Harrison Show. Welcome.
Well, thank you. My question is, and it was very knowledgeable, your guest today, is
it isn't the actual mechanics, but it is the manipulation by political entities. And the one thing I hate, and this is my question, why do politicians blame us for not voting when they don't guarantee our right to vote?
Well, just like we have scores now, I mean, using oldie Englishy, scores of politicians running to get rid of voter fraud and all of that, but you have to vote for them so they can get rid of voter fraud. The irony there is so obvious that right then and there you can see the truth. It is transparent as hell, but they're not speaking to you and me, are they?
No, they're not. They're really very, very rude people.
Well, this is where civics and accountability come into play. Most of us probably were not taught civics. I think under a certain age, they no longer teach it. So you have to watch Game of Thrones or House of Cards or Handmaid's Tale to understand how governments can work in their worst form. But this is the Machiavellian reality we live in. And you and I have to hold these people accountable. We put them in to represent you and me to change the streetlights and such, but they do more important stuff because life and death for people. What's in the drinking water? You know, what level of arsenic are you going to be allowed to drink after Dick Cheney is vice president? Lots, you know, and then we've got a problem following that. So eternal vigilance, as Tom Jefferson would have taught us. Ben Franklin also reminding us constantly that we have to keep an eye on these guys because the skullduggery is complete. The original national bird of the United States during the founding, Ben Franklin wanted the turkey. He thought it was a uniquely American bird and not the eagle, because the eagle had always been associated with countries that had conquered, that had mauled, that had stolen, whether it was the Holy Roman Empire, whether it was the Germans, it didn't matter. And he thought the turkey would be a peaceful bird. But we ended up with the eagle. So knowing that we have the eagle, you and I have a special, shall we say, responsibility to make sure that eagle's talons are not always outstretched. I thank you for your call, my friend. Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Show. You can go to caryharrison.com, get my free newsletter. Let's go to Greg on line one. You're on the Cary Harrison Show. Welcome.
Thanks for taking my call, Cary. I want to agree with some of the other callers that I believe our election system is primarily broken in a wide variety of ways.
Well, elaborate, would you?
Well, I think it's a democracy that's bought and sold. It's all controlled by money. So the people and forces in our society with the money to spend, in one way or another, they essentially purchase, our politicians because they fund them for their campaigns. And if the politicians don't do what they're directed to do, then they don't get money to run their campaigns. So you can say that we have a vote, but these people control everything. So I just don't believe it's really fair. If we wanted to have a true democracy, then we would take the money out of politics, and our elections would be publicly funded.
You're exactly correct there. And I'm going to make an analogy here, but it will fit. After World War II, in the reconstruction of Germany, they put into law that their news service had to be, or was not allowed to be, funded by corporations or by the government directly. Why? Because we saw what happened under the Germans in World War II when you had propaganda minister, government, and then you had corporations that were, running the war. And so they still have news that is agnostic, much as the BBC is still fairly neutral that way. And they keep that kind of commerce, that kind of overreach out of it. And when our Supreme Court, through Citizens United, declared, as Mitt Romney so famously said, corporations are people too, my friend, that changed the rules. Think about this. Let's look at CNN, and I'm just picking them out of a basket. CNN can vote because it is a corporation. A corporation is a person too. The difference between you, Greg, what town are you in, Greg?
I'm in Palmdale right now.
Where are you?
I'm in Palmdale. What town am I in?
Okay, so you're in Palmdale. Greg in Palmdale gets one voice, one vote. One man, one vote. CNN gets one vote too. But CNN can put its vote on TV 1 million times in one day over and over again in tens of millions of households. That's not one vote. That's tens of millions. As opposed to you, Greg, in Palmdale, standing on a tree stump yelling, "Hey, listen to me." And this is why it's a problem, because we don't see the power of giving corporations, exactly as you point out, people with money, bags of gold, bags of diamonds, the opportunity to have that single voice, except their voice is multiplied in ways we can never
we
even
should
imagine.
call that what it is. It's bribery. It's essentially bribery. You know, people talk a lot about free speech and being able to express yourself, and I think that that's fine. But anything can be abused in life, right? Anything can be corrupted. Anything can be used for evil purposes. And I believe that that's what's happened to our electoral system. And I think it's been this way for a long time. It's been controlled by all these powerful forces with lots of money behind them. And so you can think just because you can vote as a citizen that we have a democracy, but I don't believe that we have it at all. It's controlled by money.
Well, I appreciate it. What a great call. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Harold. Another Greg, a Julian, a Bart. Everyone else who's called in. If you're on hold, I apologize, but regrettably, we are out of time. But this has been an important show. The podcast is available, of course, on the archives here. You can get it on Spotify, any streaming platform or service. You can also go to CaryHarrison.com. You'll see my live TV hit tonight. That's what they call it, on overseas news services talking about our elections here. That's at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. So also get my free newsletter there. Love to be able to offer you stuff that you simply can't get, won't get anywhere else. This has been the Cary Harrison Show here on KPFK 90.7 FM in Los Angeles. Do make a pledge. Do call back this same number, and you can hit option number 2. You can make a donation to support this kind of free voice to get the continuing education that you got today. And I'll tell you, I'm putting together a series of webinars. Well, they're news webinars for KPFK so that you can get the continuing education you deserve, access and insight into the things that you deal with that are relevant to you. So those will be upcoming, and you'll hear more about them. Other than that, I will look forward to seeing you next week, and have a great week. And don't forget what Mayor Daley of Chicago said: vote early and vote often. Yeah.
This is the Cary Harrison Show.